And then you see, even with Chloe Bailey, how when you place so much emphasis on what they represent, you deprive them of the dualities of their existence. You deprive them of the multifaceted aspects of themselves. You deprive her of her sensuality because you want her to be this book smart black girl who so happens to sing and is thick, but she's Christian and conservative, so she'll never show her titties or ass. So, just to serve as a brief disclaimer, when I'm discussing the detriment of representation, I am not suggesting that representation is in fact detrimental. Especially as a black woman, I'm not suggesting that there is not a need for black artistry within entertainment. I am not stating that there is not a need for black representation at all, yet I am suggesting that there can be a misnomer placed on representation when we do not place an emphasis on identity, and I'll further explain. Take, for example, Scarlett Johansson, whom withdrew from the announced Rub and Tug film after facing constructive critiques, mainly from transgender actors, for attempting the role of a transgender man. Although trans and or transgender representation is needed as the LGBTQIA community is a marginalized group, Scarlett Johansson does not identify with the given representation because she is not a transgender man, quite comparable to Daniel Kaluuya depicting characters whom exist under the umbrella of Black American when he is a British man, or quite comparable to Kerr Gilchrist playing an autistic man in Atypical when he is not autistic. Yes, these representations are needed, yet it becomes detrimental when the representation is not identifiable to what it represents. And representation can also prove to be quite detrimental when an elected representative is not afforded the opportunity to represent the various facets of themselves. So ultimately, what I'm hoping to accomplish with this commentary, and I feel like I've done briefly, is just discussing how representation is nothing without identity, as well as how one's identity can influence representation, both negatively and positively, to where they are not multidimensional, they are seen more as a monolith. Or how, and I don't know if I'm going to be able to contextualize this, so I'll have to further explain in the commentary, but how at times one's representation can overpower their identity. And I'll further explain again in the commentary. Or even we can gauge Chloe Bailey, especially with the recent controversy of her being more in tune with her sensuality and being very much so expressive of that, translating her personal growth and development within her artistry. A lot of people found it hard to adapt to this because of what they wanted her to be, what she represented initially. She was the representation for my daughter. She's the representation for my young niece who is, black and affluent, or black and plays, live instruments. She's the representation for your suburban black girl, your average black girl, or even like Issa Rae, your, what's it called? Awkward black girl. You know what I mean? Like all these different representations, they're wonderful to have because it really makes you feel as if you're not alone. It further develops this theory of community and inclusiveness, yet it can be quite detrimental. Anything that is good can also be bad, especially when it's excessively enforced. So even going back to the whole Chloe situation, a lot of people, and I'm not saying that everyone that, initially discussed the whole bedroom routine, they had advice against her because she was being sensual. It was more so like of a preliminary disclaimer. But more so for the demographic of people that wanted to come for her because they were like, you can't be sexy, like you can't grow up because you're supposed to be a representation for my daughter. That's what I'm discussing when I say representation can just be so volatile at times. Or take, for example, Belle Calise, also known as Cardi B. She was your regular, degular, schmegular girl from a borough in New York. She was from the Bronx, the Boogie Beat. She was this exotic dancer turned full-fledged entertainer, well established as being an artist, more specifically a rapper. Although she's no MC, like she has been awarded a Grammy for her work or artistry. And I just find it so interesting because Cardi B has been awarded an award of prestige. A lot of artists, such as singers and or rappers, look forward to this moment in their career. Composers, producers, they all look forward to the Grammys. And within an earlier live or within the earlier part of her career, she mentioned that she was only in the music industry because it was a lucrative endeavor, which can be deemed as quite insulting to artists that look forward to this award as they, have always intended on being a singer or being a rapper. They're very intentional about their career. Whereas Cardi B, although there is intention within her career and her navigation, it's more so for financial stability. Than it is of actual artistic integrity per se. Not saying that this is her stance at this very moment, but considering that this once was a stance of hers, it's interesting that we disregard these sentiments and praise her for her live and her chartings, as we should. She's very successful within the music industry. Irregardless, like her success speaks volumes, but it's interesting that we allowed it to get to this point or to disregard those sentiments because she represents a marginalized demographic, because she represents the regular degular schmegula girls, because she made it more attainable for strippers to really have a sustainable career, quite like a Black China or a Dream Doll. She made it more attainable, just as Nicki Minaj made it more attainable for various young acts that came after her. We can even reference Jennifer J.Lo Lopez. She is a representative for Latina women. She is a representative for Latinos in general, Puerto Rican women. She represents the demographic of, Spanish speaking or Hispanic individuals. So looking at J.Lo's career, you see that she lacked a lot of artistic integrity for essentially she plagiarized a lot of her work. She was marketed as a singer, yet most of her songs she did not sing. So, that's where I'm discussing the detriment, or that is how I draw the conclusion to the detriment of representation, at least for this commentary. And even if we wanted to draw a more critical analysis of JLo's career and her representation for various demographics or a marginalized group, we too can assess her depiction of Selena within the Selena film. And maybe even moreover, people draw such a connection, or they feel so passionately about J.Lo, for the lack of better wording or term, because she depicted one of the greatest influences for Latina and or Latino, men and women. So, in a general sense, not only did Jennifer J.Lo Lopez represent Latinos and or Latinas, but more specifically, she represented Puerto Rican Latinas whom came from urban demographics. She came from the Bronx. I'm still Jenny from the Bronx, a song that she also plagiarized as well. So, she represented Puerto Rican women reigning from the Bronx, coming from New York. She represented that marginalized demographic, as she too depicted another demographic as she was Selena. And maybe that also allowed her to have a stronger appeal. So again, representation. I find it easier to draw a correlation between celebrities and reality than for me to draw from reality or the tense of my perspective, because it won't be received as well. You won't really know what I'm talking about unless I mention a Chloe Bailey, unless I mention a Normani, unless I mention a Cardi B, because you know more about them than you know about my perspective or, how I think. So, yeah, I just wanted to produce this commentary and share my sentiments publicly because I wanted to draw a bit of significance to this detrimental representation that is often ensued by a hyperactivity or hyper expression, this hyper need for representation, because we've been deprived of it for so long in many different ways. It seems that we are just hyperly like seeking it, like I need it, 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 and I'll disregard anything for it. You know what I mean? And sometimes that's not a good thing to do. That's quite detrimental when you disregard what is being presented to you, when you seek the branding, but you don't really examine the product. And then you see, even with Chloe Bailey, how when you place so much emphasis on what they represent, you deprive them of the dualities of their existence. You deprive them of the multifaceted aspects of themselves. You deprive her of her sensuality because you want her to be this book smart black girl who so happens to sing and is thick, but she's Christian and conservative, so she'll never show her titties or ass.